as we all have in recent months, moved to a more diverse and distributed work environment. Zero trust is now more important than ever. The analogy I'm going to use today is probably a little bit ironic given the fact that we all have to work from home, but it will actually just give you an idea of what we all experience zero trust in one way, shape or form when we travel. But as you know, with zero trust, it's more than just a concept or an approach. It's an extended security model that we have to look to implement. It was introduced by Forrester analysts, and it offers 7 key principles on implementation that organizations should focus on when moving to a zero trust security model. But we'll discuss that a little bit later on. But what we should be looking at from now on in our organizations is looking at a security posture of the default deny. We should be making sure that we identify the user and the device that they're connecting from and be able to apply a security profile and a trust profile based on that. So talking about travel, there's probably been a long time since a lot of us have experienced walking through an airport. But if I was to say to you, there was a flight from Northwest Airlines, I think the flight number was 253 if I remember correctly, that was flying from Amsterdam to Detroit on December 25th, 2009. Now, that would probably mean nothing to the vast majority of us unless you're a little bit of an airline security buff. But what that was the underwear bomber was actually on that plane, traveling from through Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Now, as we see with airports have very good security, but that malicious actor in that case, now thankfully he wasn't able to detonate the explosive devices, the explosive liquids he got onto the plane, but that actually led to the introduction of body scanners in airports. So what we saw there was a case of a security protocol that didn't function 100%. And then subsequently the airports have augmented their security and increased their security to prevent that from happening. So when we think about zero trust, when we think about an airport, airports go through a least privilege access strategy. So when you're going to an airport and if you want to fly, you have to go through strict user authentication. Now, if you think about it from this perspective, user authentication, an airport concourse like this is effectively like your public-facing websites, your public-facing services that you provide to your website, to your customers. Anyone can enter an airport like this before they've checked in. They can wander around, even if they're not flying, if they're just just going with people who are traveling. You don't need any level of security. Now, I know in certain countries that's different. I go to Israel quite a bit. That's different. You actually have to show your passport before you get into the terminal. And very similar to India, where you actually have to show a boarding pass or a ticket before you actually get into the terminal. But for the vast majority of regions, we see this as an open area that anyone can gain access to. Now, when you go to check in, that's where you go through your first real stringent level of, I guess, authentication. The airline asks you for your passport, or identification. They then ask you a series of security questions to help you authenticate who you are and what you're doing at the airport. For example, did you pack your own bags? Are there any liquids in the bags? And so on and so forth. And that's the first level of authentication. So going through that zero trust security model and going through that least privilege access strategy. The next one, as a user, you go through immigration. So you're in the situation where you are authenticated by the airline. Now you have to be authenticated by the governing agency of that country to say, yes, you are an acceptable traveler to them to get into what is effectively the next level of security. So again, re-authentication, but it's allowing you further access. And what that does is allow you access to the gate itself. Now, once you've got access to the gate, the airline, again, re-authenticates you because you're now asking for more privilege to actually enter the plane. So again, following the same kind of model that we should be following inside our networks is if you are getting more privileged access, we should be re-authenticating you as an appropriate traveler to get on that plane. So you go from tens of thousands of people who go into the airport to thousands of people who go through to departure lounge to hundreds of people that get on a plane. So again, we're stepping through that least privilege. But we still have micro-segmentation. even when we're on the aircraft itself, because the flight crew have access to the flight deck and other areas of the plane. But us as passengers, we don't. We have access to the cabin. And even then, if you've ever flown to the US, there are certain rules on flights to the US where you can't congregate in the galley, for example. You're just not allowed to do that. That's a certain policy that the US immigration have. So what we can see here is the fact that there is an ever-decreasing circle of privilege that you get after you've gone through each of these levels of authentication, but you're gaining more and more access to what is effectively a more restricted zone. So we have to think about our networks as a similar way to the way that an airport functions. Now, the reason why we use this analogy, and I'll get to the point around why airports are a good analogy for zero trust. The first one is visibility is a key. Now, we've all heard stories about facial recognition and the capabilities of products to identify users. These are being used. So even when you're using your boarding pass to get into a boarding gate or something like that, the airport knows where you are and where you've been. So they have that visibility. It's exactly the same on a network or any kind of security product that you're putting in place. If you don't have visibility of what's happening, anything can happen inside that network, and you effectively, your security controls are pretty much null and void. Now, prevention is key, and this is Checkpoint's key mantra when it comes to our products and the way that we implement security. We're very much a believer of preventing the action from happening rather than detecting it and then allowing for remediation, because the costs in remediation can be incredibly high. So what we effectively do, and it's very similar to an airport, is we inspect every package that's coming into the airport. So your luggage is scanned, every piece of luggage is scanned going through the airport to see if it has anything malicious in it that could have an effect on the aircraft once it's in flight. So what we need to do is make sure that this is seamless, again, to the end user. And a lot of people don't actually understand that this is actually happening with the luggage. Again, different airports have different policies on this. So, but what we have is three critical objectives when we're looking at a zero trust policy, and especially when you think about it from an airport, is we want zero false negatives. We don't want to miss something. We've all gone through, and I've gone through airports, and a very interesting story for me where I had been in Australia, and I'd been in a rural setting in Australia, and the very next week I traveled through an Australian airport with the same shoes on, and it detected some of the residue of the farm, which was a fertilizer on my shoe, and they thought it was actually explosives. And that's the false positive. We want to limit the amount of false positives. And the most key thing here, and the most important thing is to make it as seamless to the user as possible. Now, we all, when we travel, go through airports, and we all are now accustomed to the level of security checks that we get. Now, the only inconvenience could be that there may be a long queue, but when you're going through a scanner or you're going through a metal detector, we all understand that process, and it's part of what we have to do. And we have to make it as seamless as a user experience as possible. Now, I have the benefit of living in Singapore. Changi Airport in Singapore has been voted the best airport in the world for 7 years in a row. And the process of getting from the taxi, when I get off the taxi, to getting to the plane is as seamless as I've ever experienced in any airport. The queues are very short, it's very well run, and one of the reasons why it's been voted one of the best airports in the world 7 years in a row. So we want to be able to make that as seamless as possible. But also we have to make sure that we avoid complexity around the deployment, because that can lead to security gaps. And what we've seen with a lot of the customers that we speak to, especially, is when their zero trust approach to point solutions and in deploying point solutions in an ad hoc fashion, while can increase their security resiliency to some point, what it does do is it can lead to a complex environment, and that can lead to security gaps as well. And obviously, in an airport environment, we don't want any security gaps. So when I talked about the 7 approaches that Forrester put forward, this is how Checkpoint looks at those 7. So we look at identifying the devices, we look at identifying the people, and we look at the classification of the data that's involved. Then we look at the microsegmentation of networks to make sure that the data is in the right area of the network and who can gain access to that. And then when you think about cloud environments, you have obviously the workloads that sit on there and the workloads that sit on the data center to understand exactly what's happening. And then on top of that, you have automation and orchestration and the visibility and analytics that go hand in hand with providing that capability across what is now a modern and dynamic environment, especially when you have it sitting in the cloud. So talking about the cloud environments, we understand that it's very dynamic, and it makes it nearly impossible to ensure an effective, what we would typically have as an IP-based control. So what we've done inside Checkpoint is we've shifted the capabilities of our control left to look at things like microsegmentation to provide threat prevention and at the workload level. So looking at runtime analysis, static code analysis, and vulnerability scanning of the code as it's deployed inside the cloud, but also applying the same level of compliance and analytics around compliance that you would have inside your data center. So you may be inside your data center for 10 years and you've done a lot of compliance monitoring around PCI DSS. Moving to the cloud, you should have that same capability there, and we can provide that for you. Also, IoT. So if we think about an airport has multiple vendors in there and they have multiple pieces of IoT from multiple vendors. That's exactly the same scenario that you have inside your data center now, or whether it's an industrial environment. So what we need to do is look at the capability to be aware of these devices when they're plugged into the network and auto apply a security policy based on that. So if it's an untrusted device from an untrusted vendor, it goes into a quarantine zone. But if it's a camera from a vendor that you know, we can automatically apply a policy to that. And we're talking tens of thousands of devices across large organizations. And the capability to be able to do that automatically it increases your security posture dramatically, but also decreases the need to have a lot of people managing that, and also helps increase the capability to deploy a zero trust network. Now, one of the key aspects that we often overlook is looking at the people. So we try and authenticate people, but we also try and then look at the capability of identifying the data that they should be gaining access to and the devices that they're coming from. So what we're doing inside Checkpoint is we're looking at the capability to do access control as a service. So we can do single sign-on and machine authentication. We can then look at the security posture of that device, and then based on that, apply a user level access control to what they need to be able to gain access to. So gaining access from a corporate laptop or a home network will give you more access than gaining access from a mobile device on a public Wi-Fi, as an example. So that's what we're looking at from a zero trust perspective. And as I mentioned, we want this to be as seamless as possible. So we actually use this within Checkpoint. So for example, say you get an email and it has a phishing link in there and you click on the link. Now this would look like a legitimate Microsoft Office 365, but what we will detect it is it is a phishing site and notify the user in real time that this is pretending to be what it's not. They can see the details of it. If it's incorrect, they can obviously report it and say, yep, no, this was actually misconfigured or misclassified. But we are alerting the person in real time, as you do in an airport. Okay, there's something wrong with this, with the metal detector's gone off, we need you to go back through. So we have the same kind of analogy there. Now we have an overhauling architecture to do this. It's called Checkpoint Infinity. And this is where Checkpoint looks at a zero trust security architecture across every aspect of what you're doing inside your network. So we're not just looking at the data centers or the perimeter, we're looking at the endpoints, we're looking at the mobile, and we're looking at the cloud. Now, all of this is consolidated onto a single management platform. The key aspect to this is if, say, for example, you move a workload from a private cloud inside your data center from VMware, and you move it onto AWS as an example. You don't need to make a security policy change because we have the management capability to see what's happening at the hypervisor level and at the control level inside the public cloud. We identify that that workload has changed and apply the security policies dynamically based on that. So we have that capability. Now, I won't go through all of this slide, but this just breaks down to a more technical level. What is the exact products that we have sitting in there? The main thing to focus on this slide is the middle bit with Threat Cloud. Threat Cloud is the intelligence that handles everything that's going on across these multiple platforms. And one of the reasons why Checkpoint pushes for a more consolidated platform rather than point products is that the capability of Threat Cloud to identify an attack, and we see this a lot, is that attackers are not just going to attack your data center, they're going to attack your mobile, they're going to attack your endpoint all at the same time, and they're going to try different ways to get in. Now, this attack, coordinated attack, if we see something attacking a mobile and there's a phishing campaign there, and we identify the malicious site, that gets uploaded into Threat Cloud and shared with all of the other Checkpoint devices inside your network. So it increases your security awareness and security platforms to a certain, so we had a zero-day vulnerability. It's no longer a zero-day vulnerability, and we've shared that information. Also, we share that information with third parties, and third parties share that information with us, because we do understand that from another perspective, you've got MDMs, you have multiple cloud vendors, you have multiple management platforms, for example, for SIEM. And we even, as I said, share our research with other security vendors. For example, you see there the Cyber Threat Alliance in the middle. That is actually made up of Checkpoint and multiples of our competitors. And we will actually share the research that we do and the vulnerabilities that we find with our competitors. And to that end, excuse me, I wanted just to add on, based on what we were talking about at the start around some of the research that Checkpoint does. And this is some of the research that we share not only with, as I said, competitors, but we always go through responsible disclosure with the vendors that we find. So you may or may not have heard of a vulnerability very recently called SIGRED. This was discovered by Checkpoint Research, and what we did is we discovered that we had a wormable and critical vulnerability in Windows DNS. CVE there is for you if you want to have a look at it. What it was is effectively a vulnerability could be exploited with a malicious DNS request. Now, the reason why this was important is the majority of users that we see, or the majority of DNS servers that we see on an internal network are part of the AD. AD requires DNS services to run, to function properly. So we acknowledged, we sent this to Microsoft, and they acknowledged it as the highest possible severity score that they could say. And the impact for this was that we were able to prove that we could do a successful attack, which would allow the attacker domain administrative rights, effectively compromising the entire corporate infrastructure. Now, the attack vectors that we found, you could do it with a port and the hole in the wall. Obviously, if you're connecting to corporate Wi-Fi or free Wi-Fi, if there was an exposed DNS server, or we've actually found that we can actually exploit this through, if we were sending a link to a user with a phishing email, we could exploit it through the browser. So just to give you an idea, we're talking about 17 years that this vulnerability has been in existence. And these are all the versions of Windows Server that are vulnerable to it. Microsoft haven't actually confirmed this, but we assume that they have patched it, that it may or may not, we can't confirm, have affected some of the DNS servers in the Azure cloud platform. But Microsoft were not willing to share that information with us. The second one was released last week, sorry, 2 Fridays ago now. We found that there was over 400 vulnerabilities on the Qualcomm chipset, which effectively hits 40% of the Android phones currently in the market today. So those are the vendors that are affected. What are the risks to this? Is they can turn the phone remotely into a spying tool. They can basically render the phone unresponsive. And we also have the capability to run malicious code on the devices and hide the activities and become unremovable. The reason for that is that it is actually a vulnerability on the system on chip. So there's no way for Qualcomm to actually provide, or the Android vendors to be able to provide a software fix for this. It is a hardware problem and a hardware vulnerability. We have the technology inside Checkpoint to protect against that right now, but the only way that that vulnerability can be fixed is with a new piece of hardware. And as it's only been out for 10 days now, obviously there's no new phones on the market that are not susceptible to this vulnerability. So quickly, I'd just like to summarize around Zero Trust. As I mentioned, with Zero Trust, it needs to be an essential strategy for your implementation or for your current network that you have, for your current security posture, sorry, that you have. The main aspect to this is that it should be practical and easy for your end users to consume. Anyone who's been a system administrator and had to, or security administrator and have to apply security in an organization that is not easy to consume, you will find that the users will be the most ingenious they can be and try and find a way around that security control, which again leads to your organization being vulnerable. And as I mentioned, Checkpoint has a consolidated zero trust architecture that you can use to provide this for you. Okay, thank you very much. And I think we'll open it for questions.
Great, thanks, Gary. So if there are questions, please type that in a Q&A box. Yeah, so Mr. Suhas, PPT and the video will be shared. This will go on EliteCISOs website. Great, and let me quickly share my screen. So Gary, you are done, right? You don't have to share any other presentation?
No.
Can I?
When you go, sure.
Perfect, so let me quickly share my screen.
I will add as well is if they want to see more about what Checkpoint Research is doing, they can go to research.checkpoint.com and they can basically search through all of the research that we've published.
Perfect, sounds good, sounds good.
Yeah.
So I am looking at the chat right now, and as I always say in our webinars, we have been doing these webinars from past almost 3 months now. So if you are joining it for the first time, can you type yes, this is your first time in the chat window, please? I would just like, I'm curious, you know, how many new people join every week? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So see, there are so many people who are dialing for the first time. Welcome, guys, welcome. So what I'll do is I'll quickly give 30-second introduction of EliteCISOs. So as you see on the screen, I'll go to the home page and it says, if the screen moves, okay. Right, so what it says is the platform is for CISOs and by CISOs. So we have CISOs from the industry who is running this platform, and primarily the objective is around collaboration within the community and knowledge sharing. So once we talk about knowledge sharing, we do multiple things like we record weekly podcasts, right? This is the weekly affair that we do, and every Tuesday we release these podcasts around different topics. So these topics are, these podcasts are not discussion with a vendor, but a practicing CISO from the industry talking about the real life challenges they face in an organization. So with Mohit, we talked about surviving ransomware. So ransomware everybody talks about, but nobody comes and talks about how to survive from a ransomware from their own personal perspective. And likewise, building a security awareness program across the offices, right? Across the branches that you have in your office. So those kind of insights are available. You can go to our site, go to YouTube channel, and go through these podcasts. And apart from that, we also conduct various trainings. So CISSP batch has started in past, I think it was on 8th of August. And then AWS workshop was planned, but there was some, unfortunate incident happened with trainers in the trainer's family. So we had to cancel that training. But the new dates are available now. And this AWS hands-on security workshop is going to start from 12th of September, right? So you can go ahead and register for this as well. And the cost is peanuts. I mean, I think 3,000 or 3,500 rupees. That's what the cost of this 12-hour training is. And apart from that, we do all these weekly webinars. So every Thursday, we invite experts like Gary and talk about different topics. So next week instead of Thursday, we are doing it on Friday because one of the member requested that, okay, do it on Friday, not Thursday. So the next webinar is on Friday, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. The registration link is active. So you can go to the site, click on register now, and you can register for it. Now coming to the interesting things that everybody is waiting for. Apart from CPA certificate, the Alexa Wheel of Fortune we will run. Now to get the CPA certificate for this webinar, all you got to do is come to the website, which is EliteCISOs.com, click on events, upcoming event, and then click on CPA certificate. You will be taken to a Google form. Fill this form, your email address, your full name. If you are ISC2 member, you can fill your membership ID over here, and your CPE credit will automatically be posted on your profile. So it is not mandatory for everyone to fill, but if you are ISC2 member, you can fill your ID over here. And then to download the certificate, you have to enter a secret, and that secret is RAINS. RAINS, no capital, no first letter capital, nothing like it. It is case sensitive. So the secret is RAINS. If you enter it like this, you will get a certificate over your email looking like this, right? And you can claim this certificate as your CPE point as well. Okay, now let me go to the wheel of names. Great. So everybody who registered, their name is available in this wheel of fortune, as we call it. I will spin it. It will randomly pick one person, and that lucky person will get Amazon Alexa. Now, Gary, from a Checkpoint perspective, Checkpoint identified this vulnerability in Alexa. I hope Amazon has fixed that vulnerability and we can still issue Alexa. Is that okay? What is your viewpoint on that?
Oh yeah, like I think with any piece of technology, there's always going to be something like that pop up from now and again. But I think if you follow due diligence on opening trusted emails and things like that, you'll be fine.
Perfect.
And I expect everyone who on this call to be able to do that for sure.
Wonderful. So I'm going to spin it, and then to claim the win, you have to be present in the webinar. You must be registered with your official email ID. And if your name comes, go to the chat window and say, yes, you are here. Okay. Spinning it now. Let's see who the lucky one is. Last time my name had come. Ketan Shah. Invent on us. So Mr. Ketan, are you there? Type in the chat window. Mr. Ketan, I don't see your reply. Great. So Mr. Ketan is not there. I'm going to ensure that he knows that he won and he was not present. Okay, so I'm going to spin it again. Oh, my dear friend, Nitin Kalra from Dhanambi. Nitin, you there? Let me look at the chat window. Oh yeah, Nitin, you are there. Wonderful. So again, Alexa remains in EliteCISOs Delhi chapter this time. Wonderful. So I'll talk to you, Nitin, and get the Alexa delivered. Wonderful. So there are certain questions in a Q&A. Gary, maybe can you take a look at the questions and maybe we can respond those?
Mm-hmm. I think the first one was, could you please add on zero-day vulnerabilities? Look, when we publish things from Checkpoint Research, one of the questions we always get asked is there an active vulnerability? Usually when we publish them within the first few days, there isn't. for example, the SIG-RED one, within, I think, 36 hours, there was a proof of concept vulnerability posted on GitHub for it, but we hadn't seen anything in the wild. It's the same with the one around the Qualcomm chips. We haven't seen anything in the wild yet, but that doesn't mean to say that they're not being developed. Checkpoint's stance on zero-day vulnerabilities is we look at prevention rather than detection. So if you think about sandboxing, we have sandboxing on the network, we have sandboxing on our mobiles and on our endpoints to look at preventing a zero-day vulnerability from being executed. So we have multiple technologies where we look at preventing zero-day vulnerabilities. Publishing one of those is not something that we typically do because we try to be on the right side of the law on this one. So yeah. Is there segmentation possible for customers such as privileged, less privileged? Yes. We talk to a lot of our customers about segmentation and micro-segmentation. So the capability to do east-west and north-south traffic. And also when we're looking at cloud-based activities, the capability to look at providing visibility on the segmentation, and especially in cloud in such a dynamic environment, looking at when workloads are created, servers and services are created, and whether or not that falls into what is a acceptable policy for organizations. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that we've been advocating for years. Segmentation has become a little bit more of a buzzword in recent months, thanks to Gartner on this. But yeah, it's something that we've been pushing heavily for the last, well, I've been pushing it heavily for the last 10 years. Is it easy to do? That's a whole different question, depending on the organization and the way that the data is structured and the way that their services are structured. It can be easier or more difficult depending on that. How long will this take to implement in an organization from 500 to 1,000? So from that, what we would do is we would have a conversation with the customer and go, okay, where's your data stored? What's your data classification model? And look at the capability to do that. We actually have a very competitive per user licensing model, which allows you to use all of the technology from Checkpoint. For an organization of 500 to 1,000, that's really easy to implement. There's no real fixed time it would take to implement this in an organization. It depends on a certain level of maturity of the organization around its current security policies and how it wants to implement those. So no really easy answer, but we're more than happy to have a conversation with you to see how that could be implemented. And the next one is from which domain would we start? Like from my perspective, if I was looking at it, say for example, you now have a very remote workforce, I would be looking at the data classification of your data and the data being stored outside of your network. That's where I would start right now. If there's no level of security on the devices that are connecting into your network and the data that's going to be installed on those. So that's where I would be starting right now. Can Zero Trust be ensured for OT devices which are not on the internet? Majority of the time when we see OT networks being attacked, it's from the IT networks. So segmenting and putting security controls between the IT network and the OT network, because those are getting more blurred in recent years, is key. So sometimes you might find that the OT network can become compromised simply because it has either been connected to, or someone has taken a device from an IT network and plugged it into the OT network. So it can be ensured, but again, you still have to have that level of control and level of monitoring and visibility on your OT network, just to make sure that it's not being compromised. Can I ask you to add on recommendations provided on zero-day vulnerabilities? So yes, I mean, as I said before, zero-day vulnerability is the capability to provide a comprehensive sandboxing environment inside your network, your endpoint, and your mobile is key. As an example, we have for